Alarms blare across every sector of human space. Enemy fleets are entering human territory with gun ports open and everything charged. They strike like lightning, attacking every sector at once, and they don't realize that they just made a big mistake. Even without the main fleets, all the systems are always ready to pick a fight. Space stations by themselves open hatches and extend hidden weapons that were in blisters that you couldn't see from the outside. These were energy weapons mainly, but doors open again, allowing racks of missiles to be able to be fired out almost simultaneously at every single targets around them. Corvettes and light frigates are always around space stations, as these are what usually transport most of the goods. Arrogantly, the enemy had gotten close, very close, before realizing it's a trap. All the civilian ships, who they believed were going to be easy pickings, all have a minimum of 4 defense systems on them. These systems could be rapid-fire ballistic, missile-based systems, or energy systems on even some of them, all of which had jammers which made them difficult to get a lock on. Well, with varying effectiveness, of course. Many of the enemy used asteroid fields to try and move their way in, out, and around, trying to dodge any of the fire. These asteroid fields were what was used for mining operations near most of these space stations, and the enemy tries to engage, yet human drones are immediately launched soon after the first volley, and they have a single order: kill. Seeing these drone swarms come out, every human ship immediately withdraws from the area just in case they do not want to get caught up in it. These drone swarms were designed to take out large ships, large freighters that might come in, pirate groups that might come in. These things will tear apart a ship, doesn't matter how many point defense systems it have, unless it's a military-based human craft, which are absolutely covered in point defenses. The drones are going to get through, and they're going to tear holes, new holes, anywhere they can. Only one space station actually was able to receive enemy destroyers. This was an absolutely massive space station that was primarily a hub for goods, as many of the mining fleets would simply ferry their goods back and forth. It would be distributed and head back to the different planets. Any nearby civilian vessel was called to defend the station, as this was their livelihood, of course. They immediately turned and charged their weapons. Large mass drivers returned the favor as each ship began to fire back and forth. Additional weapons, interceptors, and jammers were being used from the human fleet as they began to spread out really wide to make sure they weren't caught up in the explosion of any ship that was destroyed. It seemed as though humans had the strange ability to understand space combat more than the enemy understood it themselves, yet they had an order to take out that station, and they drove straight towards it, right into the fire. Mass drivers be damned, and then they realized there was much more there than they thought possible. This large space station was designed to defend itself against very large vessels. The main cannons on the ventral and dorsal sides swung about, each of these strong enough to take out a destroyer with a single hit. That is when the enemy tried to turn, but they weren't getting away. They had fucked around, and they were about to find out. Even if it meant, as the destroyer ran away, this station was going to put one right up there. On the agro worlds, small populations were scattered all over them, and there was a lot of resources. Because of this, the enemy wanted to take this planet in one piece with absolutely minimal damage, which meant no orbital or suborbital bombardments at all. However, they did force a landing at the spaceport, which was finding very little in the way of defenses, at least once they were able to fight through all the satellites in space, that is. Once they touched down, they immediately dropped the ramp and sent out all their marines to take the planet, and this begins the siege. The siege consisting of snipers on every single corner as the enemy advanced, heavy equipment being used to block or to simply ram back through the enemy advance, nightly raids that would stop the enemy from being able to rest at all, as they had to keep their alertness or they would very quickly find themselves being overrun. The megafauna even was being used as a weapon. Fauna that they believed that they could simply capture and possibly breed for themselves, as it would fill the stomachs of so many. Yet before they realized, somebody from the human side gave them a warning. Was it a warning, or were they simply telling their own people as they heard, "Stampede"? This seemed to be a warning to all, as thousands upon thousands of these meat-producing animals simply ran through the area, trampling everyone in their path. It didn't matter how many they shot, they just kept coming. The energy weapons seemed to do nothing except seem to piss them off even more, as they made that horrible, horrible sound as they came through, swinging those horns on their head, piercing right through the toughest armor, and still they just kept charging through. This was insane, they thought. How could the humans do this? I mean, it was genius. This plussed up their numbers. It was definitely a combat multiplier, so they would have to watch out for it. But as they advanced to try and stop these gigantic herds, they realized that there was fence line that they had to get through. A lot of fence line. And this made things difficult, as these fences were particularly difficult to break through. They would get caught up underneath the repulsor lifts and tear them up, making them non-functional, until you got your recovery vehicle, of course, which meant that you would have to spend days holding it up, getting it in place, and hope the humans didn't shoot your recovery vehicle and drop the recovered vehicle on top of the mechanics trying to fix it. They also had another nasty surprise, which was the fact that it seems like humans could make a fighting vehicle out of anything they had. It didn't matter if it was some sort of equipment used for harvesting or planting or spreading some type of fertilizer. They actually went through with some sort of strange device that began to spray some sort of mist. It wasn't until a few seconds later that they realized that this mist was full of a very, very harmful chemical. Though most would not fall complete prey to it, and yet they would be fine later, many of the insectoids found themselves on the grounds writhing in pain as the poison went up their wings into their torso and ended them in some of the worst ways, as their insides liquefied and drained out all their orifices. They tried desperately to end the crops, stop the humans from taking any type of food, but they realized they couldn't starve them out, as the humans had readied supplies just in case of something this. They tried to chase them off, yet the humans would defend their land to the very end. They couldn't make them run anywhere. And of course, the one thing they found out was hearing a shotgun cock itself made all the invaders flinch. Just hearing that sound off in the distance made them all duck for cover immediately. They knew this was dangerous because the first time they saw one used, it caused so much trauma that even the best technicians they had in their medical fields could not fix anything. Many of their own were simply blown apart, pieces blown off, or suddenly the head would just be gone. They would find out quickly that the humans were gathering their forces, using the underground tunnel systems to find their way around. They would burst out with their homemade exosuits, which turned out to be death on two legs, spraying all sorts of fire, energy weapons, missiles, rockets, mortars. It didn't matter, but they did find out that the humans loved spraying them with plasma. You would think the mining colonies would be easier, as there was no foliage in the way. You weren't trying to protect the planet. But as they tried to go down and take the planet, they found out that mining colonies always have plenty of explosives hanging around. They found this out as entire units, entire ships were evaporated in massive bursts of fire. Homemade mortars, rockets, and mines were everywhere, flying in. They couldn't step anywhere without worrying that the ground was going to blow up under their feet, or something was going to come down right on their head. They also used the planet itself They found out that humans would set the explosives inside the mountains, inside the mesas, anywhere, and use the side of said mountain as flying rocks that would come in. They would usually place them right behind something the humans called diamond. This row of carbon is essentially useless. That is, unless you want to use it as a giant claymore that would cut through any machine, any carapace that was in front of it. Mining equipment turned out to be so durable that they needed a main battle tank and a direct hit on it to take them out. Many of this mining equipment was very large, and sometimes they would actually drive it straight at the corvettes and shuttles that were still offloading and tear into them with massive claws, cutters, saw blades, and everything else. They would drive angry. And yet the one thing everyone saw was as they were tearing these ships apart, the humans would be laughing hysterically. On the side was something written that they did not understand. You can't spell slaughter without laughter. On forest worlds, similar to agro worlds, they wanted to take it with as least problems as possible and with little damage as possible, as wood aesthetics are worth a lot of money to many of the different species. However, forest worlds are particularly dangerous, not just because of the foliage, but topography. Forest worlds tend to be more mountainous, rolling hills, long, long depressions that seem to go on forever when you're on the ground. They also found out that humans play war in the woods all the time, which makes them very, very dangerous. When they took an area that the humans had once held, they found a few recordings, as they looked through it, they saw humans playing a game called hide and seek. This seemed to train them how to traverse the woods and find things that were not supposed to be there, to find their enemy even though they were hidden. This was horrible enough. And then they found something labeled paint ball. Then they saw humans in large groups, very coordinated, moving through said forest, moving from tree to tree, using all sorts of bounding cover to make sure they didn't get hit. Even though non-lethal, it showed that even the youngest was very adept at being able to use this terrain to their full advantage. They found out that behind every tree was a weapon. There may be a trap, a bayonet, an axe, a machete, a rifle barrel, a rocket, a vehicle, or an exoframe waiting for them. If that was not bad enough, sometimes they would be walking and realize they were being dragged into the woods screaming as they could not cut themselves loose from whatever was pulling them in whatever direction. Many of their own would fire in that direction trying to stop them, but they never touched anything. This strange wire seemed to just grab them, drag them somewhere, and once they were out of sight, the final death scream was heard. The sounds of the forest would also keep them awake. It wasn't just the insects chirping, looking for mates. It wasn't just the nocturnal creatures flying around looking for food. It wasn't just the wind knocking the branches together that made everything sound like something was moving. No. They were scared because the humans showed them on the very first day that they're very good at sneaking in and cutting their throat as they sleep. They would sneak into a vehicle and make it no longer functional, or would simply blow it up or set it on fire. Then there was the weather that came in. On top of the mountains, many of them froze as they were not ready for this sudden change. Into the valleys, rivers washed the invaders away as sudden floods would raise the edge of the water up several feet and wash entire units down the river as they screamed and cried, others on the shore trying to reach for them to pull them out. It was horrendous. And then the fires. The fires that were sent would burn everything and everyone. Mostly it was their own energy weapons that would catch some foliage on fire, which would spread more and more and more, and they did not realize what to do. They tried to run, but the wind would blow the fire towards them, chasing them down. Many would drop to their knees and pray for salvation, but salvation would not come, as it would light them up like a Roman candle. They died screaming. On a standard colony world, you would think it would be easy. Although after losing anywhere from 20 to 70% of their forces due to the civilian fleets and orbital stations, along with weapon satellites, of course, they would force their landing right around population centers. As they disembarked their marines, they would charge into the cities trying to take them, finding absolutely nothing but elaborate kill zones. It seemed as though every single human was armed. The defenses around the city were already being mobilized as they were heading down. They figured they wouldn't be mobile yet, but the planetary defense forces were bringing heavy weapons to bear. But as they came in, the civilians were performing guerrilla tactics, slowing down the invaders at every stop. To include this, they released all the animals from the massive zoos they had. It was something else to see on the video, what the humans call a silverback, charge in and crash into a furry. Though the furry would win against this thing that seemed to jump at it, screaming and yelling in pure frustration, it did take the furry back at the ferocity of this animal seemingly charging without hesitation or fear. The human pets also struck out and mangled any enemy that got close. They could get their jaws into, they would tear apart. Most of the times, these pets were around the young ones. If the young ones screamed out of pain or fear, these pets would turn, sometimes growl, but always would charge, teeth first. The large felines that were around this area were from Earth, and they would pounce from hidden locations and rip the neck out of their prey. But they would not hunt anymore. No, these big kitties, they hunted for sport. They would go in, take one out, and just as everyone else raised their weapon, they would disappear. If they had been shot at before, they would be gone before anybody realized what was going to happen next. And what happened next is that big cat would jump somewhere else, grab another one, rip its antenna off, rip its arm off, tear its friggin' junk out from between its legs, or go right for the jugular and tear that to pieces. In the midst of this chaos, when they came across a large, squat rodent that seemed to wobble its way towards them, most everyone simply chuckled at it. What could this do? They heard that this was a symbol of humanity at one point, but they forgot what it meant. They believed that it would simply run away from the larger group, but they found it incredibly difficult to face as it seemed not to give a fuck about anything and just kept attacking. As soon as it wanted something, it would climb a tree after any of those that tried to run away from it. It seemed to tank any type of hit. If you struck it, it seemed to almost laugh or get more angry, which made it even meaner. And it would come at you, tearing at your legs, bringing you down and start ripping you to pieces. Sometimes just tearing a piece off and just walking away like it was no big deal. Even zapping it with some sort of venom didn't seem to stop it, as it seemed to just wobble off somewhere, fall over, and everyone thought it was dead. Then it would wake up, and if the food wasn't there, it would simply go hunting for more. Colonies on developing worlds that have not been able to get their flora up and running yet are mostly subterranean. This meant that their vehicles were absolutely, completely useless except for blowing open the hatch doors, and that was about it. They would have to go in with their infantry and clear them out. And first, they thought it would be simple, and they tried gas. That didn't work. It seemed as though they simply breathed it in and laughed. Yes, they laughed. They kept saying, "I can't stop laughing! You bastards! That's funny shit, ha!" Even through the translator, everybody thought was broken for a while. So instead, they tried to use biologicals. And this was even less effective, as it seemed to make them almost enjoy it. The humans would actually yell and taunt them, saying, "That tingles!" They even tried to drown everybody subterranean, but unfortunately, it turned out they could not find enough water at all. This meant that they were absolutely forced to go into the tunnel and face them head on. The humans would be waiting too, and they knew it. Tunnel clearing is never fun no matter what species you. The invading species became very familiar very quick with a device that they believed was called a frag out. They believed this was basically a chivalry tactic, kind of a respect thing, to actually let everyone know that this device was coming, but you never knew which way it was going to come. Would it be rolling across the ground? Would it be thrown up and actually bounce sideways through a doorway right into your hands? Would it hit the ceiling and then bounce sideways? Would it hit the ground and bounce in a weird direction where nobody could stop it? It didn't matter, because every time it came through, you had about 2 seconds to say, oh shit. Behind every door seemed to be booby-trapped. Every time you went to open it, it almost always seemed to explode. This would send the door itself or the hatch come flying through, usually taking many of them out. The concussive wave was bad enough, but then came what happened afterwards. The concussion wave was enough to make everyone just be stunned for well over a minute. This would let the humans be able to jump out and throw at them with everything they had. They would throw many of the frag outs, and then they would send a whole bunch of projectiles down, cutting right through the armor, right through the carapace, right through the hide of anyone coming for them. It turned out that every intersection was an absolute ambush. Every step was a potential to set a trap or set off a mine. Traps also became medieval. Blades, spikes, pitfalls. They also found out that the humans absolutely love plasma and fire, especially inside these closed spaces. It seemed as though sometimes they couldn't actually smell the accelerant that was there, or the accelerant would just be thrown in. Some of the invaders actually believed that this was, again, kind of a trick and kind of a hat tip to them as well, as they saw the drinks that the humans love, full of ethyl alcohol, come in, and they knew that these cocktails, as they call them, are sometimes on fire. They thought they were surrendering and handing them a cocktail, and then it would explode into flames, and everyone would be screaming and crying, trying desperately to get away. Many of them, the scream was the last one, as all the air was sucked out of their lungs. They couldn't get any in, and they would immediately pass out. This would allow the humans to go in and end someone while they were asleep. Not the worst way to go, but definitely not the best. All this, all of it, was nothing compared to the true hell that awaited those that aim for Earth. They were surprised to see that a lot of ships, a very large portion, actually remained around the home planet. Before the enemy had a chance to actually fire directly onto the main ships, they saw the drone swarms being sent out. Then they felt the weapon impacts that seemed to come from every single direction. As they advanced, they went through minefields that they didn't even realize they were hitting until they exploded, blowing huge holes into their ship, venting all sorts of atmosphere. On top of that, there was the defense satellites that had to be taken out. These armed satellites and armored satellites were very, very difficult to destroy. They did not come to land on Earth, no, but to take out everything around them. They found out that the planet was actually armed, though. As they made their way around the planet, they got close. Just close enough where everybody thought there was going to be some sort of drop. Maybe a frigate or a destroyer was going to try to make its way down to the surface. Then the ground-based cannons fired. They fired at such speeds that many of the windows around them simply imploded inside the buildings. Many of the buildings shook so violently that they would have to be removed afterwards, but the humans didn't seem to care. They also used the Earth's magnetic field to create some sort of energy weapon that swiped across the area, taking out dozens of ships with one shot. Then there was the swarm of missiles that seemed to break out of the atmosphere and then shoot missiles out its side that all seemed to be able to be guided into wherever they were going. The swarms of additional drones were right on their heels as they came up, and it was absolute horror. Fighters could also be seen lying in wait, waiting for the ships to enter the atmosphere so they could fire on them. Like predatory fish inside a body of water, waiting for you to stick in one toe, they waited. But their prey would not come. Their prey was sent to take out everything around Earth, not to invade it. They wanted the order to leave Earth, though. They prayed for it. Yet the orders were simple. Stay there until they heard all targets destroyed. At this point, they were in shambles, trying desperately to use the moon itself as some sort of defensive measure, firing around it, trying to make sure the humans stayed back. They were holding their own for a while, but they wouldn't be able to jump to FTL this close to a planetary body. They had to pull away. They had to find a way to get out. Maybe their own reinforcements would show up, and they realized something was coming in. They believed their salvation was here, but it was salvation all right, but not the type they expected. The human assault fleet had arrived back in, and they arrived with all their heavy weapons ready. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, frigates, even one Titan class came in from their jump, and they were not happy. When the enemy realized that they had completely been outflanked and now they're just outnumbered and outgunned in every direction, they tried to surrender. Their response was simple. The human said, "You have attacked our home planet. Fights on!" And with that, everybody began to fire. The enemy desperately scattered to try and escape, but there was no prisoners to be taken. No mercy. Even at the risk of hitting Earth with a missed shot or the falling ships, it didn't matter. The humans were there for their pound of flesh and all the blood they could drink, and they were going to have it if they had to destroy Luna itself. Mass drivers began to pile drive right through the enemy ships. Las guns began to cut them to pieces. Torpedoes were sent out, which immediately locked on and charged towards the enemy, many of them trying to get away, the smaller ships dipping and dodging, trying desperately to get away far enough that they would be able to survive. Maybe they could jump in FTL, yet now they had missiles, torpedoes, drones, and even corvettes chasing them down. Small, light craft that were desperately trying to get just within close enough to get a firing solution. And when they did not miss. After the battle, humanity had to reconsolidate and get on recovery efforts. It seemed as though every station, every colony, every outpost had been hit. They needed to make sure that everybody was taken care of. As this was going on with untapped efficiency, the human government got a hold of the Galactic Senate. The message showed the representative for Earth, and he was furious. "We warned you, you fat pieces of shit. We warned you, don't push it. Now we're going to give you a war you won't believe. When we're done, those alive will speak of us as their worst nightmare unleashed." Deep in enemy territory, the hostile forces laughed at this message as they believed that their territory was far too vast, and in addition, their forces too strong to be struck by some sort of newcomer species like humans. Even though they had lost a pretty decent chunk of their own militaries, they all joked how the humans had to be crippled. One of these species rep holding on to his drink as he basically drooled it on himself, saying, "Once the humans realize the situation, they will submit. If not, we will hit them again, and this time harder. There's no way that they could stand up to all of us at once. And once we tell everybody about our great victory to cripple the humans, more will join us. We have nothing to fear from these humans." Ugh, I hate saying that. What is the message? He says this as he looks over to one handing him a datapad. What he doesn't notice is that every single one of the representatives at that Holo meeting is receiving a message. This message made many of them skeptical of the report. Many of them actually believing that it's a joke. There's no way. They laughed and just waved it off. As in, how could all their worlds be facing a rogue asteroid at the same time? Then it hit them all like a pipe to the nuts. It's the humans. They then began scrambling forces to try and stop these things, to destroy them, to deflect them, to do anything. They couldn't allow these things to land. But even after scrambling their forces and doing what they could, 43% of the asteroids hit their targets in one way, shape, or form or another. Sometimes they were blown to pieces, but they were so close that they simply peppered the planet. Some were completely intact, some had only parts of them blown off, but regardless, the results were horrifying. Tsunamis of water and dirt sprayed all across the planets, especially if it struck in an ocean. Quakes shook all the large buildings to the ground as these pieces of rock seemed to shake all the planets, forcing their tectonic plates to shift. This caused major earthquakes everywhere that seemed to domino effect all across. Behind that, because the volcanoes are linked in with the plates, they all began erupting, creating a nuclear winter on many of these planets. Though the planets themselves will survive, the surviving population, they need evacuation immediately, and everybody went to work. Within just a few weeks, they convened again, and this Senate decided that once they took care of these worlds that were damaged, they would stop at nothing to end all the humans. They contacted the humans and immediately struck out saying, "This is total war now." The human on the other side said, "You might want to agree to these rules first," and immediately sent the message forward. "To hell with your rules! You have no idea what we will do to you." The human, much calmer of course, said, "If you wish for total war, then that's what you'll receive. Just do not blame us when you get exactly what you wished for." "What does that mean, human?" "You'll find out." Hello everybody, this is Syntax. Thank you so much for joining me on today's chapter. Before I leave, I'd like to send out a big thank you to some of my supporters. Those would be SS Demon, Sir, and Guardian Sage. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel. Everybody else, I'll catch you on the next one. This is Syntax, ejecting.